heard the conventional. Prepare yourself to hear the other side. Guys, teachers Mike and Margison just heard a beauty you didn't get in the classroom. Now here they are. Mark and Spears.
All right, welcome to another live episode of The Other Side. That's right, we're back to back like McGuire and Canseco back in the day. We are going back to back live episodes here, coming to you Wednesday night, and hopefully everybody is having a great evening. I know we had a really busy day today, but it was a very productive day, and this is one of those things that I kind of had circled on the calendar. One of those things I was really looking forward to. So I'm super excited about this episode this evening. We're going to jump into that here in just a moment with our special guest this evening with us. Before we do that, as we always do, we make sure to encourage you to communicate with us via our social media, through our email. So again, you can find us on our Facebook page at TOS Podcast on Facebook. You can search for that on your Facebook account, and you'll find The Other Side Podcast there. You can follow me on my personal Facebook as well. It's just Justin Spears. We are on Twitter, The Other Side, TOS_podcast on Twitter. And again, both Mike and I are on Twitter personally as well. You can search for our names and find us on there. And finally, through our email account, Margison, MARGESON, and Spears, SPEARS, all one word, at gmail.com. So again, we are really excited about this episode. You know, when Mike and I sit down and kind of plan out and produce, we go about a month at a time. We like to have some topics, kind of floating around in the queue, and then sometimes things pop up and we want to address those. But as we kind of jumped into a new partnership with the Cerberus Radio Network, those guys really do some fantastic work over there. And I would encourage any of our listeners that have, come to like The Other Side Podcast. I really encourage you to jump on and give their stuff a listen. There is just some great stuff being, just thought provoking. Really, if you just kind of sit back and listen to it and let it sink in, there's some great work that's being done over there. We've linked to their shows on all of our stuff as well. We'll continue to do that, so you can easily find your way to their stuff. They're on YouTube channel, they're on Radio Co, they're all over the place. Really, it's pretty easy to find. So we're really excited to have with us this evening Suzanne Sherman, who is a host of the Wasatch Report on the Cerberus Radio Network. Suzanne has done some work with the 10th Amendment Center, and she makes regular appearances on K-Talk Radio out in Utah. Do I have that right, Suzanne?
Yes, you do. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Well, and also too, as always, joined by Mr. Margison. Mike, good evening. How are you this evening?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. So what we wanted to do here this evening, for our listeners that may be, picking up this episode, because we really tried to make sure that we saturated the play for this, because we all three obviously agree, and Mike was the one that kind of came up with the impetus for doing this, is knowing Suzanne's background, and I'll let her explain it because she can do it much better than I can do it justice. But certainly, I think the word expert isn't too out of the vocabulary here, but living it, right? And that's the idea of how do we incorporate the values of being prepared in the society that we live in this country that we live in today, at the local level, at the state level, obviously, in this idea of the national United States of America. But obviously, there's so much today about reliance on government and other organizations to provide when things go wrong, whether it's man-made disasters like the hurricanes that we've seen here, or man-made disasters or natural disasters. the mass shootings in Vegas or whatever it might be. The idea to be prepared, and this idea that Mike had of, hey, let's look at having just a prepping 101. So I want to start out this evening, Suzanne, by just having you provide maybe a quick 2 to 3 minute overview, some of the basics, just for anyone who may be new to the concept of prepping. What is it that we need to know about this?
Well, first, let's dispel the myth that prepping is what people really were exposed to on the television series Doomsday Preppers. When I started talking about this on a radio show, I wanted to let people know that this is something they can do now, and this is also something, this preparedness, self-sustaining, self-reliant lifestyle is the way people used to live. People used to grow their own food. People used to can and preserve their own food and, have livestock and hunt and live much more simple lifestyles. And this goes back maybe just to a generation or two, depending on where you live. And when I grew up, I was born and raised in California. And as you know, we have earthquakes there. And I felt my first earthquake, I was probably about 4 or 5 years old. And, you overhear on the news when these events happen that California is going to go into the ocean. I heard in school, we studied plate tectonics, and they told us California is going to go into the ocean. Well, they never said when. So I was always terrified of earthquakes, and that at some given moment, my entire life is going to somehow end up in the Pacific Ocean. And obviously, I realized later on that that wasn't going to be the case. But going through these earthquakes, as I lived in California, and when I became a mom, and I had 2 boys, I realized that it was going to be incumbent upon me to stop wringing my hands and worrying about a major earthquake. And if one did happen, to have some supplies on hand. We were in an agricultural area south of San Jose. So I started having some supplies for some food, some canned goods, stored up some water, batteries, the basics. And I started gardening as well. And after that point, then I started preserving my food. And what I realized is it's not only a good idea to be prepared, but it's a very fun hobby. And it's a mindset, it's a lifestyle that you can have and still be a normal person. You don't have to live in a shipping container. You don't have to run around with hazmat uniforms doing drills with your kids running around the neighborhood. This is something that you can do and have a normal lifestyle and not run into a panic and race off to the store if there's a big storm coming or if you've had a major earthquake. What people have to understand is the grocery stores really only have about 3 days of food on hand. So if the trucks stop coming, if the weather stops the deliveries from coming, the food is going to run out very quickly. So if you are ready to go, this isn't going to be a big problem. Now, I lived in California when, I don't know if you heard this story, but there was an attack on a power station, one of the major stations. It was in Morgan Hill, south of San Jose. At the same time that this was shot up with rifles and the transformers were shot up, knocked the whole power out, the fiber optic cable was also sliced in Gilroy, and that disabled the 911 emergency communication capabilities at the same time that the other power was shut out. This was a test of how people would react. So we do have some very real threats. And if you don't want to prepare for the doomsday apocalypse or a major collapse, think about something that would apply to you, something that would have happened to us there. Fortunately, the power came back on soon. A major earthquake, you can think of a calamity, you can think of social unrest. You mentioned shootings also. And this continental landmass we're on, this United States, is on the most dangerous continent on the planet when it comes to weather. If you don't think any of those are enough of a reason, think about a personal reason to prepare. You can have an illness. How many people can come down with cancer or an extended illness, a broken leg, something that keeps you from going to work? Cancer, for instance, is often devastating financially, or you could lose a job, or you might just not want to cook for a night. And guess what? You have food in your pantry. And the difference between, you have a lot of professional, I call them professional preppers that are out there that have their shows and their web pages. Oftentimes these people live in the city, and yes, you can live in the city, but they don't really live that lifestyle where it matters on a daily basis. Where I live here up in the mountains of Utah, every winter I've come across a time where we are literally snowed in for about a week, and I have a plow. I can get in and out, and sometimes when it's really bad, I'll have neighbors call and say, hey, can we dig you out? And I'll just say, no, I'm good. And, I get through it. I could stay here, 6 months at least if I had to. But it's, this can be something that can happen to anybody. So pick your calamity and roll with it.
Hey, Justin, I have a quick question. How long do you think you could last right now?
Wow. Yeah. Not very long.
Yeah, like 72 hours max.
Right.
I mean, it's just not something that has crossed my mind, which is one of the reasons I find this so interesting. Suzanne, we did an episode a couple of weeks ago about Venezuela, and we talked about how the government has basically robbed those people of everything that they have, first through currency inflation, which means that the money that they actually have is completely worthless because they just turned on the printing press. And not only that, but they've completely obliterated productivity. They have lack of funds for imports. We know that the grocery stores are empty. So this is something where, I mean, right now, and this is, Justin was kind of talking about man-made disasters. I mean, government-made disasters. How might, let's just say, a typical Venezuelan who had been preparing, how might they be able to get through this catastrophe? And I mean, can you envision something here in the United States? We did an episode about 2 weeks ago on Social Security, Medicare, and the looming bankruptcy with those two institutions. Can you envision something where, the government could create a situation where we might need to be prepared?
The government is what I consider a man-made disaster, and that is a huge reason why I prepare. If you tell somebody that from the get-go, it turns a lot of people off. But what I say, even when I've been speaking at PrepperCon out here in Utah, I let people know this is a matter of relying on yourself, your personal security, feeding your family, surviving in calamitous situations. It's up to you. If you rely on a government or somebody else to save you in an official capacity, the greater the calamity, the greater the disaster, the greater your disappointment's going to be. Even if they're well-meaning and want to, there might be a situation where for a lot of damage, for instance, in a hurricane, they might not be able to get to you. So I actually had Jim Cobb on my show, who has a site called Survival Weekly, really sharp guy. He has numerous books out. And he came on my other show, and I introduced before I had my guest and went on a political rant about the party that was in charge of the White House last administration. And I don't get into politics that much when I have a prepping guest on, but it was the introduction to the show, and Obama had me really torqued up that day. But he got upset with me after the show and said, I didn't know we were talking about politics. I don't think politics is a reason to prepare. And Mike, I used the example of Venezuela because this is absolutely a man-made disaster. People are starving. And when you guys mentioned the issue of Venezuela, I thought, this is a fascinating situation, because when we have disasters like Hurricane Katrina, where people were able to come together and combine their resources until the power came on, we really don't see that as an option in Venezuela. First of all, the people are horrifically poor. We don't know if these people would have anything stored up, and if they did, to have them be surviving in a healthy situation for long term, people are going to know. People are going to wonder. They're going to smell food cooking. They're going to see people not losing weight, and maybe see people with cleaner clothes. I don't know what the firearms laws are there, but I have a feeling they're somewhat draconian, and people don't have the means by which they can protect what they have. So I was thinking, how would somebody actually survive in Venezuela in a situation like this? And the only thing I came up with was primitive survival skills, also known as bushcrafting. Get out of all the cities and go live in the jungle somewhere. And how many of these people know how to do it? I would think not many. I think these people are absolutely doomed to the government, which is governing over them.
Sad.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And a lot of the reading that we were doing on the prep for that show, too, I think Suzanne shows that, what they're doing is they're fleeing over to Colombia. They're absolutely wreaking havoc on the country of Colombia and the border towns. There were a couple of mayors of some towns over there. So, it's interesting there is that when you have a disaster like that, not only does it obviously have an impact on that locality, but even in the surrounding areas, because now you're introducing a whole new set of problems, a whole new set of people, diseases. They were talking about how the business leaders in these towns were going to the mayor and saying, you've got to get these people out of here. They're affecting our business. And I know we saw maybe some of that on a smaller scale, and it was probably more blown out of proportion. Of course, I wasn't a part of it, but you mentioned Hurricane Katrina. I kind of vividly remember, Atlanta and Houston. There was maybe a little bit of resentment about, all these people that were invading into those cities as well, but it causes those problems. And the other thing that was floating around in my mind about that too, as well, that you mentioned, that I heard President Trump mention last night in his State of the Union address. And I know this is going back, I was first introduced to this when I was listening to Mike Church's show, was the Cajun Navy. And, to have groups of people like that just have that fortitude, have the resources, have the ability, obviously are prepared, obviously have taken the time to, understand and know this is the environment that we live in, where something could happen like this, and that they're going out on their own accord. They're not being mandated. No one's putting a gun to their head and saying, go out and help your fellow man. Not only are you preparing, obviously, for yourself, but you're preparing to be able to help those who live within your confines. I mean, even if you're in a more secluded area, right? I mean, if it came down to it, like if you had an earthquake or a hurricane or something like that, I think the human instinct would be, hey, I've got to help my fellow man. And when you prepare, right, you're also preparing for that too. Is that correct?
Well, that again depends on your situation. Where do you live? How remote are you? What kind of relationship do you have with your neighbors? I would say if you're in an area that's somewhat congested and there are a lot of people that haven't prepared and people know that you're well supplied, are you going to make it a doomsday trick or treat and just hand out your supplies to everybody that comes to your door? Or are you going to try and blend in? It depends on how serious the disaster is. How long-term do you need to supply? But you raised a very, very important ethical question. What do you do with friends and family that refuse to prepare? I can't tell you how many times, even when I lived in California and I try to get people on board and I talk preparedness, and they just say, well, I'm just coming to your place. Even when after I moved to Utah, now this place, I bought it as a prepper's paradise. It is very remote. I have fresh water going through here. As you've seen, a ton of wild game around here. And it's in a very, very defensible area. But I did not just move to an area and homeschool my kids where they never get to see anybody. I can go to Park City any day. It's close. I can go to Salt Lake City. We can still have a normal lifestyle. But you have to ask yourself, given your neighborhood, I'm with these Mormons up in Utah are prepared. They are rugged. They're the personification of the ruggedness that settled the West. It is a very good place to be. If you're in a place like Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York, any area where people are just used to having anything available to them when they want it, and you're ready and they're not, you better have a plan to protect what you have on hand.
Gosh, that's a great point. It's actually just not chilling, but it's thought-provoking. This is just a...
Nat Geo has a movie. You can actually see this on YouTube. The movie in its entirety, it aired on their television channel, but it is on YouTube, and it is called American Blackout. And the premise is, I think it was EMP or something with the power grid. The power was out on the entire continental landmass for 7 days. And it details what happened and where. They highlighted the different families, depicted different scenarios. One guy was a prepper. He had a place out in the country. What happened when I think there was a violation of PERSEC, which is personal security, when somebody revealed how much food they had and other people came. One scenario was a couple in New York City that was in the top of an apartment building. Had they been prepared, and stayed upstairs, they would have been just fine. But it shows the complete and total catastrophic comprehensive meltdown people had without power for just 1 week. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't even notice the difference here. I could be here and not leave and have not a single problem.
Wow,
but think about how would that affect you?
I don't even want to think about it. I mean, this is going to kind of, I guess, lead into our next question, but I'm totally unprepared. I mean, I have like nothing. And I wasn't kidding when I said that we could last maybe 72 hours, but I haven't done anything. Justin?
Yeah, no, I mean, and I'm close to a major metropolitan area. I'm about 20 minutes outside of Indianapolis, and so again, I kind of was thinking, when you were talking about the dependency that we have on what government provides to us and what our economic structure provides to us, I am completely unprepared. I mean, even the amount of on-hand fresh water, supplies. And I live in a neighborhood where, as you were kind of mentioning that, Suzanne, I was running through my mind, what would I do? Would I go to my neighbor and say, hey, here's what I've got. What do you have? Would I be tipping my hand? Would that, because you're talking life and death at this point. And, some of those things kind of go out the window, I would imagine, when you're talking about, survival in that regard. And then, of course, you throw in kids as well to the equation. It's a wake-up call to me as you're going through this, Suzanne. It really is a wake-up call that this is very, very practical. So let's kind of transition into that then. I think this is maybe what you were going to get at here, Mike, is that what could a guy like Mike or I do, somebody who has been a little bit more dependent upon, quote unquote, the system, if we wanted to start prepping tomorrow? What would be, maybe like the first 3 steps that you would recommend for someone to get started without, obviously becoming overwhelmed?
The first hurdle you've already crossed. The awareness of the need to and how reasonable it is to get started. I started watching, when I started prepping, that show Doomsday Preppers came on, and I'm watching this going, holy cow, I could never be this prepared. Resist the temptation to go online and get a year's supply of freeze-dried food for $4,000. Think about what your needs are going to be. Assess what is most likely to hit you in your situation. In Arthur T. Bradley's book, and this is one thing I recommend everybody get this book. It was the first one I got. I still have it. I've interviewed him on my other show twice. It's called The Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family. You can get it on Kindle right now for free. I have this book, and it covers every single scenario. And get yourself some information. You're going to need food. You're going to need water. Think about the basics. You already have shelter if you're in your home. So some people say, well, I can't afford to buy a bunch of food. Then start small. You can go to dollar stores, or if you have a Costco membership or Sam's Club, something like that, start getting food if it's on sale. Food that is high in calories and nutrient dense. I love getting chunky soup. I don't normally eat it, but it even has the benefit of pop-top cans, and you don't have to cook it and heat it in water, add water to it and heat it. You can eat something like that right out of there. Get food that's easy to prepare. If you're without power for, say, a week, you're not going to want to have to cook a lot of food. You want things that are easy to eat. Store water, get bottles of water, have that stuff on hand. And from there, you can get kind of creative. You can get it into this almost a homesteading, self-reliance mindset where you can start growing your own food. If you have a place to grow something, get a little tomato plant some basil, something like that. But think about what you're going to need for if you just want to take 72 hours. How much water? I think they say 3 gallons per person per family member. If you have a source of water where you don't need to store a lot of it and it's reliable, say a swimming pool in your backyard or a stream in your backyard, think about ways to filter water. But food, water, and then you have your shelter. If you live in an environment like mine that gets very cold, how many ways do you have to heat your house? I have a propane heater. I have a furnace. I also have a wood stove. Think about getting your windows shored up for wintertime. If you live in an area where there are hurricanes, you'll have to come up with an evacuation plan. Focus on where you live, what your most likely scenario is. If you live in Colorado, don't start your preparedness plan by worrying about the Yellowstone caldera. Think about what's going to happen in your area, what's most likely to affect you. If your job is a little bit iffy and you're not sure, or your health is a little bit iffy, keep some supplies on hand. So if you lose your job, you have things that are stored up. I mentioned health. If you're not in the greatest of health, if you're out of shape, if you smoke, you know what? Good health is money in your preparedness bank. We mentioned government. We mentioned man-made disasters. Look at our healthcare system. We might not be able to get good healthcare in the future. Do everything you can to take care of yourself. That's still preparing and living a normal life. Buy an extra can of beans if you want. Buy some extra rice. Think about extra soap if that's on sale. Things that you're going to need, things that you might take advantage of. Just sit down one day and think, what is it in my life that's really helpful that I really don't think about that I would miss? How about reading glasses? If you have kids that are growing up, buy some clothes that are sizes bigger for them in case there's a time when you might not be able to get them. Babies, diapers, diapers, diapers. You don't want to be without that. So think about the things that you're going to need and then keep it normal, keep it sane.
Yeah, that's a great point. I know a couple of weeks ago, we had a really nasty cold spell that came through here where, wind chills were, I'm sure you could probably kind of laugh this off, but wind chills were coming in, like in the negative teens, negative 20s. And it was getting, that's cold. I don't know, that I know that, for us, even in the winter, that's cold stuff. And we had an automobile accident near my home and it knocked our power out. And I had actually left the house and my wife was here and I was kind of, texting with her, hey, what's the temperature drop to? And she said, well, it's down to, 56 in the house and it's getting pretty cold. And she was kind of monitoring that we were able to laugh it off. But, the people were just melting down on Facebook at the power company because in their minds, it was taking too long to get the power back on. And I mean, it had been like maybe, an hour and a half. And so I can't imagine, like you said, with that one scenario, 7 days in the dead of winter with no power. I mean, these people would, and I myself included, we all would have struggled to survive through that. So it does really kind of bring home and bring the light there how serious this can be.
Well, also think about, and again, these are issues that you could go on for another show. If you're driving, if you live in an area like I do, and if you get in an accident and you have these temperatures here and you're stranded, you could perish if the structural integrity of your vehicle is compromised, a window's broken. So what do you have to keep you warm in your vehicle? Or you get a flat tire and you need to stay in that vehicle overnight. I mean, I know this is a little out there, but my son was driving home a couple months ago, and there were literally 3 mountain lions on the side of the road when he stopped, and they looked at each other. And I said, now you see why you don't want to get out and change a flat tire when you're by yourself out where you live. Think about where you live and what you would need if you were stranded in your vehicle. If you're traveling, think about the terrain where you're going to be driving through. But to get started on prepping, again, think about what your needs are. Consider family members that may be dependent upon you and have a plan. An example, when we went back to perhaps when the government could not help you, local paramedics or fire or police can't help you simply because it's too dangerous for them to leave, was during Hurricane Matthew. And I covered this on my other show. There was actually a 911 call, and the Weather Channel played the actual recording of the phone call. A woman had her parents, they lived far away from her, and there was no plan to get them. And the mother was tending to the father, who was wheelchair bound. And the water was climbing, and she was up on the counter calling for emergency assistance because the water's rising. Father's in a wheelchair, can't get him up. And they said, "We're very sorry. We cannot send anybody out right now." I mean, you have to think about the power lines that were down, and the storm surge with the flooding. And fortunately, it ended well for them. The member of the family did not perish. But if you have family members, again, that are particularly vulnerable, even if they're not close, you need to make sure that they have a plan ready. Good idea is to have a plan with your community. I had a friend that went through Hurricane Katrina. 3 weeks they were without power. The community came together, and they, ate all the food in the freezer first, and then they went through the other steps. Some of them had generators, some of them had showers that were running, and they came together as a community. Talk to your neighbors, talk to people in your community, and see if they'd be interested. If you have a member of the community that is a physician, when you can't get help, I had a doctor, his name is Dr. Bones, Joe Alton, MD, very, very well known in the preparedness community. In fact, he has a book out, The Survivor's Medicine Handbook, I believe. And if you know that book, you can survive about 90% of what will come your way. Prepare. If you have a doctor in your neighborhood, say, "Hey, can we count on you to provide medical services? We'll make up and help you with your food supplies." If somebody's good with working with electricity or with carpentry, come together with your talents. Security, also think about security. How are you going to protect what you have? That's another ethical question. And that should, novels that are the post apocalyptic novels are fantastic because they present you with so many of these ethical dilemmas and questions that you might not come up with on your own. Again, what if you live near a planned community that is, as a result of sprawl, encroached upon your area where you're growing food, where you're self-sufficient? They know you are, and they want to come and get your food. They think that you should give it to them just because you have it and they want it, which, as we know, we're conditioned to expect this from the government. So how are you going to handle that? We don't have all the answers right now. They're all personal to you. I've seen people that were interviewed. They said, "We're Christians. We will not harm another person to protect our food or to defend our lives." These are all things that is a very personal decision, how you go about it. But the basics: food, water, shelter. Don't hoard. Don't go out and buy a bunch of gear that you think is going to be helpful. Keep it simple, and then learn as you go and progress with things that will be helpful for you.
I remember hearing fairly recently that there were parts of Puerto Rico that just, recently got power back. And that was after Hurricane Irma, which hit, it was months ago.
Yeah, it's been over 4 months.
And imagine that and what these people are going through. And the infrastructure probably is already just, I'm guessing, probably slightly poorer than what we're accustomed to here. The institutions probably aren't quite as stable as they are here. But that's a situation that is right now. It's happening right now. And you just wonder how much those people probably could have benefited from just a little pre-planning and preparation.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, again, these are people that live in a government, in a community that the government infrastructure and the government itself is pretty inept. And again, in a community like this, how many of these people are really thinking about preparedness? I would venture to say that a lot of these people, like the folks in Venezuela, are trying to get by. Obviously, Puerto Rico's not the same as Venezuela, but I just don't think that you see a lot of people with that mindset in that community.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. I want to kind of wrap up here with where can people get resources? You mentioned a couple of books. If you can reiterate those, or if you know of websites or people to listen to, your own personal information. I know on the Wasatch Report, you do talk about this a lot. Where can people learn more, or how can they reach you if they want to learn more?
Well, they can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Cowgirl Esquire, Suzanne Sherman. I highly recommend the book that I suggested earlier. It's called The Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family. It's by Arthur T. Bradley. He also has a series of post-APOC. They're called novels. And this book, though, it is comprehensive. It goes into power, lighting, sanitation, and hygiene, waste disposal. I mean, there are so many communications, ham radio, all sorts of topics. So I would highly recommend that. It's a good read. It's very informative. That book will also provide you with resources. Again, Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family. Find some good authors. One of my favorites is Boyd Craven. The first one that I read in that genre was Good Fences, and that raised that scenario of a farmer who lived who had a common fence with a planned community, and when a disaster happened, none of these people were prepared. So you can think about these ethical questions, and find some prepping groups on Facebook. I'll have to find some that I follow as well. I can't think of one offhand, but that book, I think, and that will give you some other sites as well. And I would disregard the impulse you might have, again, to go out and spend a ton of money on food and gear. Keep it simple. Get food that your family is going to enjoy, and use it as a fun hobby, as a learning experience. I think it was Kerr or Ball is the book to canning and food preservation. Pressure canning is a fantastic way to store food. If you have a garden, learn a skill. Like I said, hunting. I learned to hunt when I was out here in Utah. Think about family safety as well, and learning about firearms. Go to your local gun club. Find out and ask if there is a reputable firearms instructor where you live. So just ask around. And I also recommend looking at that movie, American Blackout.
I definitely am.
Yeah, those are great resources. Suzanne, thank you for sharing those. And yeah, what I really like about what you said there at the end is, oftentimes when people are learning about a concept, it's one thing to get involved with it, to kind of start to consume some of the readings and the websites, but there's a practical application to this that I think it would make it so enjoyable. You can get out and start planting. You can get out and start learning a skill, like you said, and not just sit passively by and read about it and then just go, oh, okay, well, I've taken that into consideration now. I'm okay. There's a lot of involvement with this, and you have to be proactive. So I really appreciate you, bringing that to the episode tonight. So thank you for that.
Well, sure. And keep it fun. Get your kids involved. They love gardening. Kids love to get dirty and plant food, and then you put it on the table and they enjoy it. So there's a way to do this without scaring your kids. They're going to understand that the food is there for them when other people might be trying to get to the store. And it's a great hobby to have. I taught mine how to can. I taught mine how to hunt. You can do this and keep it fun and not alarm your family. And they'll see that what you're doing is actually very smart. I even got my parents to get some stuff on supply, and I never thought I'd get them to do that. It's fun to inspire. And then the better off everybody is in one of these disasters, the least reliant they're going to be on the government. They can come together and help each other out, and everybody's going to do well. And it's, like I said, it's a fun lifestyle. It's a fun hobby. It doesn't have to be some fringe community as it's portrayed on TV, because think of it this way, these people want to put this lifestyle into a bad light, because again, we know that the media is in the tank with the government, and they want us reliant on the government. It doesn't have to be tinfoil hat. Just be ready and enjoy it while you're getting ready.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. We are very, very grateful and honored that you would spend a little bit of time with us this evening. So thank you again for that. And that's going to wrap it up for tonight, guys. We appreciate you sticking with us here on a couple of back-to-back nights. We're going to take a little bit of time here. We're going to come back strong next week. Mike and I have an episode that we're going to hit next week over clauses in the Constitution. We'll be taking on reading some of the clauses in the Constitution. One of the things that we challenge our students in the classroom to do is to read the Constitution. It's not that daunting. It's not that challenging. And we want to kind of talk a little bit about how the federal government has seized on some of these elastic clauses, as we call them, to expand their power. So we'll be taking that on next week. And again, our thanks to Suzanne Sherman for her time this evening. You have now heard The Other Side.
Fully informed until you've heard